I was tempted to call this millions because research projects I would carry out if I received the millions needed. Bernard was very helpful. He suggested I should change it to the future instead of talking about if I received the millions. So I'm hoping that there might be somebody who actually does give some support to this area. I've been, for those who don't know me, I've been active for several years. I'm still active at the University of Gothenburg. I'm by training a clinical psychologist, but I specialized in this area. I did my PhD on the Ganzfeld technique. First, a little orientation to the university world, the world of research funding. Sometimes I don't think the public are aware of how much money is spent on projects, especially if we compare the money that the SBR or the BL fund gives to parapsychology. Often my colleagues wouldn't bother applying for it. It's so little. They're into the big time, as it were. So we have a major collaborative project at Gothenburg, and at times I think they have so much money they really have no idea how to use it. In physics, again, it's massive, the amount of money on collaborative projects. I haven't been able to get an exact estimate. It depends on the size of the project, but I've looked at some individual research awards, and they can be over 3 million. And what isn't known is about 50 to 60% of funding actually goes to overheads. And in Sweden, we also have to pay medical and social costs, and any money that goes to the research, well, you've got to pay tax on it as well. So there's actually very little money from smaller projects that ends up in the pockets of the researcher. So for that reason, many researchers do apply for these heavily funded projects, and there's a lot of cutthroat competition. It is also tempts many researchers to take shortcuts, to fudge their data, or even fake the data in some cases, so-called questionable practices. There was a recent scandal in psychology that estimated about maybe a third of, perhaps even more, of findings in psychology are not replicable, are not really well established. So it's a bit like this, a racetrack. There was a period during the late 90s, early 2000, when parapsychology was well funded. For instance, at Gothenburg, we got funding from the Swedish state for a period of about 5 years, and was topped up by the Perrick Warwick Fund at Cambridge. Again, not a massive amount of funding, but it was enough to fund research for doctoral students and for this digital real-time Ganzfeld. So the digital real-time Ganzfeld reproduces psi experiences in the laboratory. You can actually produce them in real time, and we have a telepathic situation which there's a sender and receiver, and we record what's happening in real time, so we can see when somebody experiences something in this altered Ganzfeld state and how it corresponds to, in this case, a film clip that somebody's looking at, and we can compare if it occurs in real time or not. So it is a very useful technique. Now, marked in yellow there, some of the conference presentations that correspond to things I'm talking about. So I'm not just talking loosely, it's also a great opportunity to create an overview of the topics that come up during the conference. The whole area of parapsychology is very wide and has a vast amount of phenomena to deal with. So I'll try to create some cohesion by going through it now and seeing how it corresponds to my own particular interests. Yeah, there is some good news, and potentially good news. There's a chair established in parapsychology by a Swedish donator. The money was left in the 1960s, but didn't, for various reasons, become available until 2003. And the idea was that, well, the terms of the donation concerned establishing a chair in parapsychology, but it was a bit loosely formulated, so they could twist and turn it. And during the time when they were discussing it, there was a promise of a further donation of 10 million. So suddenly parapsychology would be lifted up into the big players, so to say. So this was planning a large donation was the heading of this newspaper article. It was in the Industrialist paper in Sweden, so it got quite a lot of circulation, but not in academic circles, more in circles of industrial leaders. And those who understand Scandinavian languages, and there's a few here, will understand that that is quite simply planning a large donation of the order of, I'm out in yellow, it would be about, at that time, 10 million pounds. So it's quite a substantial fund. It was planned, as you can see, but it turned out to be a missed opportunity because, well, I won't go into all the boring details of what happened to the original donation to establish a chair. It was established, but they tried to manipulate things. They gave it to somebody who had no background in parapsychology, so they thought he would use it for other things. But after a while, he started using it for parapsychology, and then there became a big controversy over it. 9 professors wrote a petition against it. And during the course of all this, this Swedish entrepreneur, he was the guy who actually developed, if you know it, temper mattresses, which take the shape of the body when you lie on them. He had a lot of money and he was very interested in the field, but when this controversy from the university occurred, he lost interest in it. I take some responsibility because I was ranked first for the position. I could have maybe told them about this large donation, but at that time I was very naive. I thought you shouldn't try to buy positions. No, it's quite normal that even the universities advertise for people who can bring money with them. So maybe I should have made more advertisement for the fact that they could have got more money had they showed a bigger interest in parapsychology. So, I did actually get some money, some promise of money also, again planned but didn't happen. The Human Sciences Research Council in Sweden approved one of my applications, but then they added I should come back when I could come with a plausible explanation for Psi. It was like coming back when you have a Nobel Prize. So, do we have any kind of theory that would give us a Nobel Prize? We don't really. We have Walter von Lucador's model of pragmatic information. It's a very complex theory, but basically it proposes that when we make a measurement, it alters the system. And the system has always, system of reality, that is, always has to be maintained. We must maintain a consensus reality. So psi experiments, by their very nature, question our view of reality. And so it's built into the system that they can't be repeatable. It's also a kind of addition to the theory that we are, by that very nature, co-creators of reality. Now, I won't go so much into this, but it's basically the observer effect or the experimenter effect. This is established in physics that once you make an observation, it can change what's happening. The classical thing concerns these split. What are they called? The wave can take, light can take 2 forms, either a particle or a waveform, but depending on the observer. This you may have come across non-local entanglement effects. But many physicists would oppose this. I know personally Ed May, who is a physicist in this area, and he believes it's implausible that quantum effects and entanglement can occur at a macro level, especially at a human social level. But there are other physicists one of which is a leading American-Swedish physicist, well known for the book The Mathematical Universe, Max Tegmark, and he seems to be nearing some form of panpsychism or idealism as a view of reality. We're going to discuss this much more, and we've got together for the panel Bernard Carr, who's an established, well-known physicist in his own right, has a lot of interest in the area, and our other star speakers here. So it's going to be very interesting to get all these people together, see if we can create some kind of consensus on how to integrate psi into our theories of the mind-body. So that is a talk this evening, not to be missed, a panel discussion. So if we don't have a Nobel Prize, or don't have a theory that would give us a Nobel Prize at the moment, then we have to go back to hypothesis, testable hypothesis. And these are my choice ones. The first three on my list concern special states and special participants. It's always about special people here. This is the commonality between the first three of my choice hypotheses, the most promising ones that I think exist in the field today. So special shared states, shared dream states, I'll go more into this in a moment, and especially shared synchronistic experiences of twins. So we have to look for special participants or special states, and twins are also special participants. Then we can look at the last three, which are more to do with findings that can actually have some theoretical implications that can lead to some idea of what psi actually is. The first three are to do with more looking at individuals and finding people who have this is a gift, and the last three are more to do with theoretical implications of what psi is. Okay, we take the first one. Now, I'm making an assertion here, and not everybody would agree with me, because UK parapsychology has traditionally been more interested in following what's called the J.B. Ryan model, that is, in testing groups of people and finding scores relating to how groups perform, or correlating psychological tests with performance on ESP tests. But my point is that if you look at paranormal experiences and how they're distributed in the population, it isn't like height, which is distributed normally, there are tall people and short people and so on, or eating disorders. It's distributed more like something that's very unusual. I was about to say autism or Asperger's, but these days that is also becoming normally distributed. No, it is so that paranormal experiences, they occur perhaps to everybody. Many people have, maybe more than 50% have had a paranormal experience. Those that have them a lot are relatively few, and it's those that we should be looking for, not the person who has it maybe once in a lifetime. But most of parapsychology is concerned psychological tests, and here we're correlating two sets of very dubious data. Students or participants, when they take ESP tests, they maybe score a couple of % above chance. And personality tests are not highly reliable, so most of the variation in the results is due to chance. There are a few exceptions mentioned here. There's a highly sensitive personality test and phenomenology of consciousness inventory. So there are some promising tests. If we go to physiological measures, that again, promising reports, but as usual, difficult to replicate. I'm glad that Mario Kitanis he's a former PhD student. His area is physiology, psychophysiology. He's going to present a poster on this topic. He got some very promising results for his PhD, and then, as usual, the sad story, difficult to replicate. But he hasn't given up, and he's doing some more work on this. So he's going to present this in the form of a poster tomorrow. Okay, the attempt to normalize psi means that I'm making a provocative assertion, but I really do believe this. I think we've missed many opportunities. There are individuals such as Malcolm Besant, David Mandel, Chris Robinson, you can read the list here. But it's not just Sweden. I have to say I've also missed out on Sweden. We had Adrian who was very similar in his idea about psi to Kenneth Batchelor, and produced a lot of macro phenomena, invited me along, but I was too busy with other things, so I didn't take the opportunity. He died early in life. But there are these two figures here, well known for their predictions about 9/11. They recorded them in advance. They drew their dreams. They had dreams of, this is Peter Mandel on the right here, and Chris Robinson. Keith Hearn, you probably know, lucid dream researcher, he did show an interest in Chris Robinson, but no, as far as I understand, no lengthy study has been done. So these were people around, and they were totally neglected. The one that you see last on this list, Uri Geller, I did myself make some effort to recruit his interest. But again, I have to admit, I didn't follow this up. I remember he rang home to me, left a call on my telephone answering machine saying I was welcome to visit him anytime. This is from my visit with John Beloff some years ago. But so there are many such individuals that we really should have followed up. So my looking at this more experimentally, I have a sort of hypothesis that successful participants are prone to spontaneous alteration in states, and they're highly sensitive to stimulation. This is a commonality that we have through the most promising research areas on altered states, the Ganzfeld and hypnosis. They induce these altered states of consciousness. And there is some reliability in the association here with psi. It's not exactly a simple causal relationship, but it's promising. And we need to measure the changes in consciousness. This is a so-called change in state hypothesis, the idea that we need to measure the changes as they happen, but we need to do this rather than, as has been done a lot of times, by post-experimental inquiry, asking people afterwards, what did you experience? We need to actually do it at the time. We can do this by teaching a self-report scale. So when people are in these altered states, this is something that Charlie Todd originally developed. They can call out a number that corresponds to how altered their state of consciousness is. And this is something that has been totally neglected. I mean, the subjective experience in this area is very crucial. Just asking people what they're experiencing is decisive. Or we can record they can talk into a microphone, record their experiences, and we can analyze these afterwards. So the simple hypothesis, and this is something I did some work on long ago for my PhD, and I found some promising results that the more sudden shift in consciousness, the more likely it is that some form of psychic experience, or ESP, comes into it and influences what we experience. Then there are these shared state of consciousness. I mentioned lucid dreams earlier as an example of this. And Charlie Todd actually got a publication in Science, which we'd never get today. I think academia was much more open to these things during the 1970s. So the idea was that we needed to study joint altered states of consciousness. Two people are in the same psychedelic state or the same dream state, they're overlapping in what they experience, the alternative realities, as it were. And Stephen LaBerge developed a simple way of doing this using his usual technique of which he used to show that lucid dreams were something objective, that the lucid dreamer can, with a simple Morse code, notify the experimenter when he's in this state, and if two people can communicate in the same altered state and agree on the code can go from one to the other, and they both do it at precisely the same time, then you have an objective record that they have shared the same state of consciousness and the same experiences. There are lots of anecdotes about the actual experience, that people do experience the same thing in lucid dreams, but very little in terms of research. And it's very hard, obviously, to do this in the laboratory, especially lucid dreams. We are still waiting for a newer technology which will induce lucid dreams in ordinary people, but there are certain modern techniques of making it more likely. Then we mustn't forget virtual reality equipment. There's been almost nothing done on this. You can equip two people with these virtual reality equipment and see if they do share the same state of consciousness. So the hypothesis here would be that simultaneously induced states will enable information to be shared through physically separate individuals. And with some support from the Parrot Warwick Fund, we're doing some research on this at the moment. I've also done some work on twins and shared experiences. One simple technique, and one twin is given a shock or a surprise stimulus, and the reaction in the other is observed. So if hand goes in the bucket, what happens to the physiology in the other twin? We can measure it and see. You can see here the reaction and get some objective record of it. This is an area that was first given some interest amongst academia by the work of Guy Playfair, who published a popular book summarizing research on this area. And it led to two projects I've been involved in, reported on here, and we also have a student from Gothenburg who's working in Greenwich, and hopefully, if David is able to fulfill his obligations, he will present his thesis in 2019. Just a nag, David. Okay, next area is forensic use of mediums. Yeah, I think there have been many cases on TV and mass media, mediums locating bodies and solving crimes. I think there's little doubt that they, on some occasions, do succeed. Now, the question is, I've often wondered about, is there a difference between when they actually communicate using ESP and when they're supposedly in touch with a departed spirit? I mean, in the last conference, we had a presentation about Gerald Crosset, who could locate dead bodies. There is actually a film which hasn't got much circulation, but I remember I saw it at one of my first PA conferences, where a body, where Crosset tells the film team where to go. It's actually recorded in Japan, and they go to this harbour, and he says exactly where it's going to be. In that very moment you see on camera, it's a very actually macabre film, but you see the body of the child actually appearing in the harbour where the Crosset has told the film crew to go. But there are many of these examples, and they're difficult to explain. But is it just due to the medium using ESP? Many mediums assert that they are in touch with a dead spirit who can solve the crime or give names and specific information. If so, one would expect there to be a difference between using ESP and being in touch with a dead spirit. And obviously a crucial point in giving information should be the death of the person. If the body's been moved or deteriorated or something has happened, and are they able to follow that or not? I wouldn't expect a so-called spirit to be able to follow earthly events to that detail. I would expect there anyway to be a difference between the quality and the results. Other people might argue differently, but clearly there should be some difference here. Then is this all due to acting, due to some kind of role play that mediums go into? I know several mediums have been, that person I've had contact with, have been had a job as acting before they became mediums. So I've often wondered, is there any real difference? We need to look at the physiology. We need to actually ask them to act out roles and see if there is a difference. I'm glad to say there are some conference presentations on mediumship, 3 of which I've listed there. So it's really good that there is still a continued interest in this area. Then the other area of great interest for me are near-death experiences and related experiences. This is of current interest because there's a lot of, relatively speaking, a lot of research going on into the nature of consciousness and mind-body relationships. And concerning near-death experiences, I think we need to be clear about some basic facts here. The basic fact, most important, is whether there is perfusion to the brain. That means whether there is oxygen reaching the brain or not. And a flatline EEG occurs if there's no oxygen at all in about 15, 20 seconds. That doesn't mean you're dead. Dying is not an either-or process. There are various factors involved in it, and the body temperature is one factor. So if you may know this, if you cool down the body, it doesn't need so much oxygen, and especially if CPR is maintained, then the life is extended, and but without perfusion or CPR, then it is still possible after, you can't be exact here, but about 15 minutes or more it may be possible to resuscitate people. It's often said that those who died through the Titanic, the iceberg that struck the Titanic, many of them could have been rescued had they been taken from the ice and resuscitated because they were in the hypothermic condition. Today they could have been. Here's a case, Anna Borgenholm, a Swedish physician she was, and she was skiing with 2 other physicians, and she was trapped in an ice floe, and it took quite some time before her companions could dig her out, but they were physicians, and they noticed that she's, after a while, stopped breathing, and there was cardiac arrest. She was rescued. Finally, they could dig her out, but it took 80 minutes for them to get her out. And she was immediately given CPR, and then it was continued during the helicopter transport to Tromsø, Norway, which specialized in resuscitation. They noted she had a body temperature of 13.7, but they didn't give up, and it took 9 hours for her to recover consciousness. Her experiences? Well, she was never asked. And this is, for me, very crucial, to study those that have been so-called dead, or at least had flatline EEGs. For longer periods, we know that there are examples of people who had flatline EEGs and do report things. These are relatively short periods. And what happens if it's a longer period? You may know this book that's created a lot of controversy, Eben Alexander's Proof of Heaven. We need more such cases. I mentioned the Borgenholm case because there we had all the physiological monitoring apparatus in place, so they could say exactly, for instance, her body temperature and how much perfusion there was to the brain. So this needs to be studied, and the hypothesis here would be, do patients who are resuscitated after long periods of cardiac arrest, do they still give these traditional classical detailed forms of NDEs? We don't know. I don't think there's much data on that. So it's an open-ended hypothesis. The ND area is represented at the conference. We have a couple of presentations on that. There are other exceptional cases which question our normal reductionistic view of the brain. The one that is present in the current New Scientist, that everything is just brain activity. One of the most striking cases actually occurred in Newcastle, documented at the Children's Hospital here. Noah was born with spina bifida and 2% of normal brain volume, but dramatically the brain began to show recovery, and his behavior also became more and more normal. So I don't know the latest follow-up on it, but when you see the recording of it, he is largely behaving like a normal child, and this is totally against our view of neurodevelopment. Because if you look at you can see yourself, if you look at just how much brain there was at birth, it's quite a dramatic difference. You can see it just doesn't make sense. The brain, the vital structures might be there. They couldn't even say, as from the report, well, the basic structures were there, but totally flattened and distorted. Well, this would produce brain damage, even because the neural tissue would be damaged. It couldn't possibly develop normally, according to orthodox theories of how neurodevelopment occurs. So this is quite an anomalous event. Then there's a case of John, I think is pronunciation. It's well known that now, through the work of Adrian Owen, that many patients who are in a vegetative state actually do have conscious experiences. And not all, it's only 15-20%, and even that is considered a bit controversial. But the attitude towards it all is that we are nothing more than our brains. But there are exceptional cases. One of the cases that Adrian Owen admits he can't explain is this case of Joanne, who had a score of 3 on the Glasgow Trauma Scale. That's a 15-point scale. Widespread white matter damage due to the anoxia. He was unresponsive during a period of 2 months, but later recovered and could describe what was happening. He could describe visitors coming and all the events that took place. But another case that questions very dramatically the conventional view of mind-body relationships. So the proposal would be here that it's important to have a review of the implication of these exceptional brain states for mind-body theory. Up to now, people just ignore them, hope they'll go away. But it's also important to, I think, look at altered states of experiences, because I think they have important implications for our theory of mind-body. And here I give a plug for David and his talk this evening, and also his book, which I think is courageous enough to go into this area. So the final area, I think, which is promising, I talked about at the conference last year, but I can be more specific here. Thought forms. These are forms of independent mental activity representing the unconscious or the conscious needs of individuals. In other words, the thoughts that take on their own life. Just checking how we're doing for time. Yeah. They are described in other countries as the tulpa, the puka, and the jinn. The most classical cases is Harvey's puka. Yes. The veteran researcher Tony Cornell remarked that there was something basic that was being missed in research on poltergeists and apparitions. And could this be it? Could the creation of thought forms in combination with sight explain many of the enigmas in poltergeist phenomena, apparitional experiences, and medium communications? Conjuring Up Philip case is such a classical example of the people got together in a group and created this fictive figure, but which took on its own life and seemed to have its own identity in the end. Even Shakespeare appears to have used this concept. This is a plug for my book now. I made a plug for David's, so I can justify our own book here. We put together a book which documented some of the Shakespeare's writings in this area about the puka. There are presentations concerning the poltergeist at this conference. That's good that continues. But must be said that these are all anecdotal reports. There's no evidence that these thought forms truly exist, perhaps because nobody's done any research on it. So we need some research on this area. So can thought forms be produced through hypnotic exercise and produce evidential objective effects? We just don't know. There's no research on it. So, millions in consciousness and psi. Martin Johnson, a Swede who was a professor at Utrecht University. He had a state-funded chair in parapsychology, and he made predictions, continually rise predictions, when this great breakthrough would occur in psi research. And he, as I said, had to revise them, and his final prediction was put back to 2020 because he thought that globalization and commercialization of universities would not benefit parapsychology. He's quite right. I think it hasn't. As I said in the beginning, it's determined a lot by funding, how much status you have in the department, and you have to buy everything now. So it's very hard to promote research through curiosity. It has to be research through funding today. So the above ideas I've just presented are all aimed at enabling research in consciousness with psi as an attribute. I think this is really important that we now take the opportunity of the interest in consciousness to emphasize how important it is that psi is an attribute of consciousness, and we need to integrate this into neurobiology. So the breakthrough isn't an actual, as far as I can see, going to be any kind of breakthrough in one particular finding or one particular area, or we're not going to get a Nobel Prize at the moment for one particular theory, but maybe we can change the attitude of people towards consciousness research and seeing that psi is an important attribute of consciousness. And I'm glad to have succeeded in getting Bernardo to give an invited talk on this area, because he is someone who actually has succeeded in the impossible and getting his views broadcast in a respected science journal, Scientific American, and his views are quite contrary to the normal reductionistic view of consciousness. But we're going to hear more about that during his invited talk.